Welcome to McLean School. I am Frankie Engelking, the Director of Student and Community Wellness. And tonight, you made the right choice. You skipped the Wizards game, you skipped the Caps game, you're missing the Orioles versus the Nationals, but you got the best ticket in town, for sure. Because tonight, you're going to hear from a panel of outstanding experts on the topic of technology. And technology has become a mainstay in every home, school, and business, and it's certainly one that's not going to go away. So its impact on our children and our communities is of such invaluable information. So we are going to learn tonight from the experts who have worked in this field for many, many years. And so it's my pleasure and honor to first introduce Dr. William Stixrud. Dr. Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist and director of the Stixrud Group. He's also a member of the adjunct faculty of the Children's National Medical Center, and he holds an appointment as assistant professor of psychiatry, behavioral sciences, and pediatrics at the George Washington University School of Medicine. He's the author, along with Ned Johnson, of the upcoming book, Wired for Control, The Science and Sense of Allowing Kids to Find Themselves. Dr. Stixrud is also a musician and plays in the band Larry 2.0. Which some night we're going to have you come just to play for us. That would be a fabulous presentation.
It is.
We are proud to have Dr. Stixrud as our colleague and our friend. And it's always a thrill to welcome him back to McLean. So thank you for being here. We also have Adam Pletter, who is in the back here, who's a speaker. He's a licensed clinical psychologist in Maryland in his 16th year of private practice, and has been a digital dad for 13 years. There's experience. He received his doctorate of psychology from the George Washington University and specializes in the treatment of children, adolescents, and young adults. Dr. Pletter developed and runs iParent 101, a digital parenting workshop and e-course. And he has written on this topic for the Washington Post and other media outlets. So welcome, Dr. Pletter, to McLean. We have the trifecta tonight because we also have Dr. Michael Reiter. Dr. Reiter is a psychologist in the Washington metropolitan area. He earned his Ph.D. from the George Washington University and works with children and adolescents and young adults in the treatment of anxiety disorder, ADHD, executive functioning deficits, and technology overuse. Dr. Reiter also specializes in helping emerging adults and their families who are struggling to move forward. So welcome, Dr. Reiter, to McLean. Thank you for being here. So I'm sure as our program begins and when it concludes, you will agree with me that you got the best ticket in town and you made the right choice. So Dr. Stixrud?
Thank you so much, Becky. Luckily, the Wizards game will be on probably till 11, so I'm looking forward to seeing the second half. This is a real treat for me. I've been lecturing about the effects of technology on kids' brains and kids' development for probably about 12 years now. And it's ironic because my family's always been very low tech. When my kids were little, my daughter's probably 7, we used to have a babysitter in the afternoon for my wife and I meditated, but then they got old enough, we would let them watch a video or some, like one of the PBS kids for shows for TV. And at one point, my son was probably 4 at the time. He went to a friend's house and they watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And he came back and told his older sister, "Jara, there's more than one channel on the TV." But in any case, I've talked a lot. I've given dozens of talks on this topic. And when I thought about doing it this year, I thought, why don't I reach out to some other people who know a lot about this area as well? And I thought about Adam because I knew that Adam had developed this program for helping parents help kids use technology responsible. And Adam is a really outstanding therapist, one of the best therapists in this area. And I also thought about Mike Reiter. Mike actually graduated in the same graduating class as my daughter in the same school. And Mike is really a terrific young therapist who sees a lot of kids who are having some failure to launch kind of issues, and many of them have what looks like a semi-addictive relationship to technology. And I want to get his perspective on how to help kids who for whom technology is not a positive thing in their life on balance. So what I want to do is take about 15, 20 minutes and just kind of talk, just say kind of the big picture stuff that I think about in relation to this issue. And the first thing I'll say that I tend to think about that I think that ultimately, if we don't remember that we're part of nature, that the future is not pretty. And that people talk about, people said kids' brains are completely different than they used to be now, but it's true about that your brain is continually rewiring, but the deepest parts of your brain that determine how much sleep you need, or what's stressful, or that haven't changed in 100,000 years. And kids still need as much sleep as they used to. When I think about evaluating technology, can you hear me in the back okay? I think about how does it affect sleep, which is arguably the most important thing for a developing brain. And I think about, there's a woman at San Diego State named Jean Twenge, who did this very interesting study where the MMPI is a psychological inventory that was developed in the 1930s. And she actually compared the responses of college students at the height of the Great Depression in the 1930s, in World War II, in the Cold War. And what she found is that kids in 2007 were 5 to 8 times more likely to report symptoms of anxiety disorder or major depression than young people were at the height of the Great Depression. And there's an article that just came out in Pediatrics in December that suggested that it looks like there's a very significant increase in major depression in adolescents within the last 6 or 7 years. And many people think there's a strong association between that and the incredible power in kids' lives of social media. Interestingly enough, I'll just say that Twenge also studied responses of kids. You know the notion of locus of control, whether an internal locus of control is I'm confident that what I do matters and I can make my life work, and external locus of control is that what's the point of trying? You know, there's not much I can do. That your life is determined by forces, larger forces, and what's happened, what she found is in the same period when it's increasing vulnerability, anxiety, and depression, that kids' sense of control has become more external. And that's the book that I'm writing with Ned Johnson, that actually the new title for that the Viking wants is called The Self-Driven Child. But it's about how important having a sense of control over your own life is. And part of the challenge for young people now is that they're so into social media is that oftentimes they feel completely overwhelmed and out of control with their own life. That from a brain point of view, the two most important things I think are, how many of you know the prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead, the executive part of the brain? You know the amygdala, the amygdala, the primitive part of your brain that senses threat, and it's particularly, it mediates the emotional context of your experience, but it's particularly sensitive to anything that's potentially threatening, so that...
It's fight or flight, isn't it?
It's a fight or flight. So that anything that could potentially, if you see somebody's angry, you see somebody's afraid, your amygdala picks it up and will start your own fight or flight response. Now, when you're in your right mind, what you want is you want your prefrontal cortex regulating the amygdala. And that's what happens when you're feeling clear, you're feeling positive, you're feeling upbeat, you aren't overly stressed, your prefrontal cortex regulates the rest of the brain. But when you're stressed, the amygdala runs the rest of your brain, and you go into a defensive, reactive, self-protective kind of stance. And unfortunately, that young people are often they're very stressed, and oftentimes in the state where the amygdala is running the prefrontal cortex. The other thing that from a brain point of view that's relevant here, anybody know the default mode network? The default mode network was discovered in 2001, and what it is, you know fMRI, with the functional MRI, where they look at brain activation? What they did for years, and they still do, is they compare, they'd have you sit in a scanner and look what happens in your brain while you're just sitting in the scanner. And then they'd have you count backwards from 1,000 by 9 or something. And they'd look at, give you a task to do, and they'd look, they compute what's the difference between that brain activity when you're doing the task versus when you're just sitting in the scanner. But nobody paid attention to what's happening when you're sitting in the scanner. until 2001. And what they identified was there's this well-demarcated set of brain networks that they call the default mode network that only activates when you're just sitting and thinking about your life, when you aren't focusing externally on a task. And it turns out that this default mode network uses something like 60 to 80% of the brain's energy, that it's extremely important in the development of sense of self. It's extremely important for the development of empathy. And because empathy develops in part by you have an experience and then you think about it. You have an argument with somebody and you say something to somebody to hurt their feelings, and you think about it in the shower, and you think about it on the bus, or that you need this downtime. The reason that it says past and future is if you're just sitting and you don't have your phone, there's nothing to do, what do you think about? You think about your past, you think about your future, you think about your relationships. And this seems to be really important for development. And one of the gals who's written a really interesting paper on default mode has raised the question, does kids' constant use of technology minimize or the extent to which the default mode gets activated? And can you read what it says there? Yeah. And it's true. It says, no, Grandma, listen, double click the Internet Explorer icon. And the guy I got this from, Larry Rosen, is somebody who's written a lot about technology and does a lot of research on it. And basically says it's so intuitive to kids, and it has the attitude we're going to lose them if we don't let them use it a lot. And I think that there's some wisdom there. On the other hand, as I'll get to in a minute, it's challenging. Now, when I first started lecturing about technology, something like 12 years ago, mainly what I was talking about was TV and the very first video games. And what we knew about TV was that just having it on was stressful. That there's a province in Canada that introduced TV kind of late, maybe 1965. What they found was the crime went up kind of pretty dramatically after they introduced TV. You think about if you're in a waiting room and there's TV blaring, you're in a what do you call it, at a gate at an airport, and the TV's on. It divides your attention. It's stressful. It makes it harder to concentrate. And Michael Rich, who's an expert on media at Children's Hospital in Boston, says it's really like secondhand smoke. So even with TV, there's concern about just having it on. And I remember my sister was married 3 or 4 times to a bunch of losers, and I could never tell when I go to visit him, was it just that the husband was just such, I mean, my sister was an interesting piece of work too, but I love her, but was it I always find myself just so annoyed. Was it because of the loser husband, or the TV was always on? It just it's not black and white. Daphne Beblay has done a bunch of studies on video games, and because the brain develops according to how you use it, you make new connections. That if you play action video games, it means these first-person shooter video games, you develop the kind of skills that you need to get good at the game. You get better at. So you get better, for example, at being able to visually to do visual scanning. You get better at being able to pick out details amongst an array of stimuli. And some of the attention systems function better. And there's actually, is it Sarah, Margolis, somebody who has a TED Talk saying that we really should be playing 50 hours a week of video games because it will solve the world's problems if we do. And the person's a really brilliant person. She's crazy, I think from my point of view. But I mean, there's certainly the first lecture I gave about technology, video games, that it was all negative. I mean, there wasn't anything like this hadn't showed up. But it turns out that study at Boston, at Harvard Medical School, laparoscopic surgeons who made the most mistakes didn't play video games, and so they made 37% more errors than people who played like more than 5 hours a week video games. Those prescribed video games. So it's not entirely black and white at all. And certainly the social media part is complicated. That there's certainly tremendous advantages of social media, particularly for girls. There's a big downside. People, just several years ago, people were writing about Facebook depression. I'm very concerned about from a locus of control, where everything you do is evaluated by other people. Everything you do is to try to create a persona that's going to get likes from other people. There's a very lot of concern from that perspective, and really being addicted to this stuff is really the new normal. There's this have anybody seen this new book called Irresistible? It's about behavioral addiction. It's about technology and behavioral addiction. It's a really good new book. But there's a study that was done at the University of Maryland about 3 or 4 years ago where they asked undergraduates to go for 24 hours without the use of media, and then to blog about it. And they all said it's terrifying. It was a panic attack, kind of stuff. And I just this book, this Irresistible, refers to some Microsoft research that suggests that in 2000, they said the average human attention span, based on the research in social media, was 12 seconds. 2013, down to 8. Goldfish are 9. Certainly there's concern. The multitasking piece this is very interesting because I mean, all the research that's ever been done on multitasking, what it suggests is you really can't do it. You really can't pay attention to two things. And if you try, whatever you're doing, you make more mistakes and you do it slower than you would if you just do it one thing at a time. Now, this Larry Rosen, I mentioned, this guy who's written some good books. He's a good guy. They're written about technology, but called Wired is a pretty good book. Basically, his angle is because the kids can't unitask anymore, so we just have to let them do it. And I think that kind of thinking is wrong-headed myself. I personally think it's wrong-headed. If it's not good for the brain, then ultimately it's not going to be sustainable. This is arguably the biggest technology-related problem now. A woman by the name of Judith Owens is one of the world's expert on pediatric sleep. And I was talking with her a couple of years ago, and I was saying that the woman who really kind of pioneered pediatric sleep, Mary Carskadden at Brown, did all these studies in the late 90s and the early 2000s showing just how profoundly sleep-deprived teenagers were. Most of them would go into a dark room at 11 o'clock and be asleep within 2 or 3 minutes. Many of them had EEGs that looked like people with narcolepsy. And I said, isn't all that research out of date now that kids are sleeping with their phone? And she said, it's got to be worse now. So this may be again, there's just the research on sleep. It's just so incredible. Just everything that they're learning about. It's just so freaking interesting that when you sleep, that cells in your hippocampus, your memory center, fire in reverse, which seems to be a way of kind of getting rid of the stuff you don't need to remember. I mean, that one of the guys, who world's expert on sleep, says sleep deprivation. It's like a negativity bomb in the sense that if you memorize a list of words, some positive words, some neutral words, some negative connotation words, and you don't sleep very much, what you remember mainly is the negative words, which may be one reason why my opinion, a formula for becoming depressed is to be too tired and too stressed for too long. I mean, I think that's it. So there's one of my main concerns is the fact that the more we sleep, the better we do. The more if kids get enough sleep, their life is just remarkably different. And that in terms of evaluating technology, what do? This is one of the most important things. And this is for me is the most concerning thing. Rosen, his research basically has found this, that media use predicts negative outcomes. Physical health, psychological problems, attention problems, behavior problems. In other words, the more screen time, the more these problems. He gave a lecture 3 years ago, and I asked him, is this just a correlation in the sense that maybe the fattest kids are the kids who won't exercise, or the kids who are most depressed want to play more games? He said, God, we've controlled, and people have done other studies, we've controlled for so many variables. that we think it's causative. We think that it's really the use of technology. This is the thing that, again, it's not black and white. It's not like if we're trying to figure out who won the World Series in 1957. I'm not going to the library. I'm not suggesting that. But I am suggesting that when we evaluate, is this how much technology could be using? Because people are always saying, oh God, there's a great app for that. And I'm saying, are you really saying that you want kids to spend even more time in front of a screen when we know this? That screen time is an independent risk factor for all kinds of medical problems. It says that no matter how much you exercise, the more time you spend in front of a screen. So these are some of my concerns. So there's concern about with Facebook, about narcissism. And Larry Rosen, who I really respect, makes the case we can no longer ask our children to live in a world where they're immersed in technology in all parts of their lives, except when they go to school. We must rewire education or risk losing this generation of media immersed, tech-savvy kids. And so there's obviously that schools can't spend money fast enough on technology. And to my knowledge, there's still not a single study that's demonstrated that kids learn better through the use of technology than they do with more traditional methods of learning. And I feel that if we don't do things that help kids' brains develop in a healthy way and work efficiently, that we can have all the technology in the world, and it's not going to have a positive effect. So there's this kind of thing. This attention span. Listen to this. I read recently that people would stand in a field and listen to the Lincoln and Douglas debate for 5 or 6 hours at a time. Could anyone in this room stand and listen to a lecture for 5 hours? It's a little different. So that's what I wanted to tell you. I think that that in my own work, if kids can't have trouble reading, the first thing I want them to do is get books on tape. I tested a kid from the Waldorf school, a no-tech school, and the kid who's dyslexic, and I said, he's got to be listening to good stories. The kid's up in 2nd grade, and I said, listen as much as he can stand. So they got him an iPod, so he can listen to stories, and the school's really upset about it. But this is what they have to do. That so many of the kids I see, they need technology to survive academically. It's not a black and white thing. Again, there's some benefits to playing video games. Obviously, there's tremendous benefits to tremendous power in technology. It's just also, I just think that if we don't remember we're part of nature, and we don't remember that we need face-to-face interaction. We develop empathy. We develop a sense of security in this world through face-to-face interaction. We operate best when we feel well rested and when we aren't stressed. And there's a lot of evidence that too much technology use makes you tired and stressed. And I'll turn this over to Adam. Thanks. Hold your questions, and then we're all done. We'll just talk.
Okay, well, thank you. It's a tough act to follow. So I'm going to move now away from some of the more brain-based intellectual learning that we just did. I spend my days talking to kids. I'm a child psychologist in Bethesda, and so I try to get down and dirty into what is actually going to help this child and parents, because most of the guys I work with have parents that come along with them. So what I have developed over the last, 7 to 8, 10 years, when the iPhone really started to explode, and the iPad and the iPod touches, was this program, iParent 101. It's based on real life questions and struggles that parents like us, myself included, are having. And so, just by a show of hands, I just want to get a sense of who I'm talking to. I understand there might be some people online that I won't be able to see, but we talk in lower school, middle school. Raise your hand if you're in lower school, a parent of a lower school. Okay, middle school, upper school, anyone? Oh, actually, pretty even. Oh, excellent, excellent, great.
30-year-olds?
Okay, there you go, that works. Okay, so just as a basic way of introduction, I am not going to go through my whole program here. I took a small snippet for the sake of this discussion tonight But I'm going to sort of touch on, and certainly during the Q&A, I'm sure we'll get into some of the other tactics that I use in my program. But I'm going to be really focused on contracting and setting up a social media contract for your children. And I'm going to get into the why, because it's really about setting up basic family rules. And so for the middle school and upper school, it's a lot harder because if you haven't done something like this already, it's like putting toothpaste back in the tube. It's very difficult to do, and you're going to miss a lot, right? A lot is going to be left on the counter, but it's still potentially worth doing. So I'm going to get into some of the details. I'll go through, I'll show you a sample contract. I do have a customizable sample contract as part of my online course that you could check out if you'd like. But I'm going to go through the nuts and bolts of it now and give you guys a flavor of that. Okay? So as I said, the setting up a family contract is really about defining the family rules. Something I say all the time is, this is no different, although it's way more complicated, it is a parenting decision. You have handed this adult device over to your child. I don't care how old they are, even 30-year-olds, if they're still on your plan. You've signed the contract. They also have a set of rules and boundaries that you're expecting them to follow. Even if you don't have it in writing, you're expecting them to follow these basic rules. Maybe it's implied, maybe you've told them, don't know, but I would set it forth in writing. It's going to be a roadmap to get more digital access. A lot of my program really is based on this ladder system where if parents are able to set the rules and then have them enforceable, then the child, teenager, can earn more digital access. As they demonstrate more appropriate behavior, they get more access as they get older. As they struggle and mess up, because everyone does, even adults, and they show inappropriate behavior online or even to you at the dinner table, they might get less access, and it goes up and down this sort of ladder system. So in order to do that, you have to lay out the basic rules. What are you expecting? So you want to start small, depending on the age of your child. It may vary by age, and as I said, it's a roadmap for more digital access and have some input from the child. So it's not just out of the blue. Base it on what they're looking to do. So therefore, it's going to set up clear expectations and guidelines and set up these learning experiences. As they change their behavior over time, they're going to get more of what they want. I call that a learning experience. So a lot of this has to do with proactive parenting, proactive versus reactive, right? Most of us, and Bill sort of touched on it earlier, there's a biological need to react to our environment and nature. Things that get our attention, we react more to. Typically, whatever cliche you want to use, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, the problem gets our attention. It's part of just the way we're wired. So as parents, we're more likely to pay attention to the negative behaviors. So a lot of what I do in my parenting work in my office is trying to get parents to notice more of the positives, right? So there's no different, like I said, parenting decision here. As we're dealing with the more complicated landscape of the digital world, I want to set up a more proactive stance. We want to stay ahead of it, and therefore we need to know what the rules are. So here are my 5 basic keys to setting up this contract. First one, as I already alluded to earlier, it's an adult device. Okay, can we all agree on that? The iPhone out of the box, the iPad, whether it's Samsung, I don't care what the brand is, these smartphones, the iPads, computers too, but certainly the ones that fit in their pocket, they're adult devices. And so therefore, there should be some rules that come along with it, just like you have a cell phone contract with, I don't know, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, whatever your cell phone contract is. If you violate the terms of service that you all read, I'm sure, then there might be a problem. You might lose your service. And so it's the same basic concept for your children. So it's not set up for kids. You want to set up the parental controls, and I'll walk you through that at another time, with the rules. So there's boundaries. All children, I don't care if, atypical, child with some learning differences, ADHD, whatever, all children do better when there's clear boundaries and guidelines. And I would probably say most adults do also. So we want the boundaries to be clear. I would suggest expectations are written, so there's less confusion, less tension. There's less, am I allowed to do this or not? Dad was in a bad mood yesterday, so I wasn't allowed to do it, but now today he's in a good mood, so I'll be able to get away with it today. That doesn't really work, okay? Developmentally appropriate for children to test limits. All kids are gonna test limits. Predict that, help them predict that. That helps everyone have a sense of control when we know what's coming up. But it's developmentally appropriate to test the limits, especially if it's on an adult device. If the boundaries are blurred and it's not clear what your child is allowed to do, they're gonna keep going until, depending on the child, most children will go until they hit some boundary. Whether it's something that scares them, like watching 13 Reasons Why when you're 10. Anybody know that, 13 Reasons Why? Okay, it's out there, it's all about suicide, and there's some rape scenes, and it's meant for older teenagers or adults. And yet I have children in my office, 10, 11, who have watched it on their phone on Netflix, and they tell their parents about it after they've been traumatized. That's a problem. So we want to, they're gonna test, they're gonna explore the internet, the digital world. We want to be clear what the rules are. So I said that already. Similar to parents' contract, cell phone. This is going to be a theme throughout these 5. Model your behavior. If you're setting up a set of rules that there's no, as we'll talk about in a minute, that if they're not supposed to have their phone at the dinner table, for example, and every time the child walks into the kitchen and you're eating cereal and you have your phone out, not only are they going to call you a hypocrite, but it's going to be a lot harder for them to follow the rule. So, driving in the car, if you're checking Facebook every time you're at a red light, hopefully that you're stopped, not while you're driving. When your child is driving, there's going to be a higher probability, I think, that they're going to want to then check. And then, all of us as parents, when children are starting to drive, that is going to be one of their #1 concerns with the phone in the car now, let alone the radio playing. Are they texting and driving? It's scary stuff, so try to model your behavior. Okay? Number 2, I would try, as you're writing down the list, guidelines about where and when the device can be used. And that would be pretty specific depending on what you're seeing and what you know your child is going to do. And this is one of those areas where you want to get some input from the child. Sleepovers, meal times, where does the phone go at bedtime? I'll tack on to what Bill said earlier. There's a tremendous amount of research out there about the sleep deprivation, and that it's almost a level of toxicity in the brain at night that needs to be cleared out. And if your child is not sleeping enough, the #1 symptoms in my office, mood problems, yes, attention problems, yes. And so having the phone in their room is only going to be a recipe for all of that to increase. So where does it go? Hopefully not in their room. Don't fall for it, but I need it for my alarm. They make alarm clocks that are not on the phone. So just be really clear about that. If your child insists on using their phone and they're old enough and whatever, there's a thing called guided access on the iPhone that I can show you later, that you can lock the phone only on the alarm clock or only on music, so they're not going on Snapchat and all that. It's called guided access. It's worth looking up if you want. But I would just recommend getting a...
Put parental controls on it too.
Of course.
And then you limit the time they can have access to it, and if they try to use it after hours, they have to put a pin in and you get notified.
Depends. Most parents are not that savvy, so well done. Most of the built-in controls in the phones don't do that easily, or don't do that at all. So you need to then have a third-party software and set that up and then troubleshoot that, because they don't usually work as you just described, even though that sounds good. A lot of them don't, and I test them all the time. But yes, there are some that, for the most part work, but I still would not encourage them, because then they're going to be focused on trying to get around the parental controls instead of just going to bed. It's easier to have the old-fashioned parental control of the parent being in control, and the rule is it's downstairs on the charging table or wherever. So that would be my clear push on that. Quick question?
Yes, a quick, like, when do you think it's, like, the kids bringing their phone to the room or to a charging station? At what age do you think they can start having the phone in the room?
From my point of view,
Like, do you think even when they're seniors in high school?
I would suggest, you're not gonna like this answer, all of us should not have our phones in our rooms. So I don't think there's an age. You could say that's not realistic and everyone has their phones in their room. But if you're asking me what is best, it's not good for any of us. And we walk around sleep deprived also. And we all, I'll speak for myself, I am addicted to my cell phone. And it's gotten worse as I put this program together, to be honest. It's ironic, but it's true. So I'm putting things out there and I'm checking how many likes did I get, how many views, it's not good. But anyway, you're right. So, screens in the bedroom, you know, again, these are questions. You can see I put question marks there because I'm not telling you what to do here, but these are common areas where you want to have this discussion with your partner, with your spouse, and with your child to come up with what is a reasonable set of rules of when and where the phone can be used. And then attend to positive behaviors as they're handling the rules, as they're following the rules. As I said earlier, you want to promote that. You want to reinforce those positive changes. They're acting appropriate. You want to give them attention for that, which it might be they get a slightly later bedtime, or the more they're following the rules, they get more of what they want when they change their behavior. That is really the key to everything. And then, of course, model your adult behavior. As I said earlier, you know, remember the old commercial, I learned it by watching you. It's still alive and well. They are watching and they're learning. Everything that we do, they are modeling. Number 3, and I know I'm going through this quickly, but I want to save time for Dr. Reiter. So, number 3, all passwords are private. I'll pause there for a second. I have lots of tweeners, 10, 11, 12-year-olds who have their phones and they think it's okay to share with their friends. I strongly discourage that. So the passwords should be private. And I can tell you some horror stories later if you want to hear of why I feel so strongly about that they are private and, not but, and shared with parents. Okay? You should have your child's passwords to be able to get onto their phone. Not to snoop. Respect their privacy. You're not going on and seeing what they're doing, you know, without their permission. You know, you should have their permission. You're handing them over this adult device. So you have their permission. You're the one who bought it. You're the one who has the cell phone contract. It's okay, but be careful with this line where you're respecting their privacy and you probably are not talking to them about what you're seeing on their phone if you go on once in a while, unless there's a reason to. I wouldn't ask what their friend Sally was talking about or whatever, unless there's some reason to, like a safety concern, or if you're wondering if they're having a hard time with something, ask more generally. Don't feel like you're like ambushing them and trapping them, because that's not going to work. You want to have a dialogue and have building trust, because eventually they're going to be on their own and they're going to have a cell phone. It's not going away. So it's really about teaching them to be savvy users themselves. So with at least the iPhones, I think Samsung has some version of it. Most of my work is with Apple products because that's what most kids have. The iPads, the iPhones, the iPod Touches. But so all the newer generations have this fingerprint thing. I recommend parents, when you're handing it over to them, or even before you do, get your thumb on there. Not behind their back, you can let them know. It just makes it easier. This way you know their password and it just makes it easier. You pick it up, and if you just want to check a couple of things, you could just put your fingerprint there. It's very simple and it actually works pretty well. It encourages your child to pause and think. Ultimately, that's what this is about. If we're teaching your children, if you're teaching your children how to be savvy tech users, good digital citizens over the years, which they need to be, you want them to pause. They have a developing prefrontal cortex that Bill was talking about earlier, right? They don't have the impulse control that we do in this room as adults. They don't. It's developing. Some are better than others, but I think 25 is what they say, that it's fully formed.
Cognitive functions 25 plus minus 3. The emotional regulation functions in the prefrontal cortex
32 plus minus 3. Okay. Wow, okay, I haven't heard that number, but wow, okay, 32. So they don't have the impulse control that at least most of us, I think, do. Most of us look north, I think, are north of 32 here, so, as parents. So keep that in mind. There's a really cool new app that's coming out called Raccoon, that I'm not gonna get into detail, but it encourages the child to pause. It's Raccoon with 2 Ks, because it sends a simultaneous message from Snapchat or Instagram, and I think they're working on the messaging, the iMessage. If the app thinks there's something inappropriate that the child has posted, it's some machine learning thing, it sends a message. It doesn't stop it, doesn't block it, but it sends a message to the child, this might be inappropriate, and it sends it at the same time to the parent's phone, this might be inappropriate, with a copy of the picture or the post, so then you guys could talk about it. But again, it doesn't stop it. But the reason I like that app, and the reason I'm sharing it with you all, because it encourages the child to pause. Last time I posted something without thinking, I'd have had that stupid talk with my dad. I don't want to have that again. So is this okay? Is this okay for me to send? That's the key. You want them to pause and think and develop that impulse control.
Does that work with Snap?
Snapchat, yes. Required permission to download. Your kids will hate me for this, as my children are not a fan of this, but to me this is essential. Okay, these are adult devices, and if you're handing this adult device to your child with the understanding that they have full access to the adult digital world that you do, not my judgment, but be aware of that's what you're doing. You're handing this adult device to your child, and they have access to everything. Everything. And yet, the most horrific, scary things that you maybe have encountered on the internet or can imagine, they can too with a couple of clicks. And I'm not trying to scare you, that's a fact. So you want them to be aware, you want to be aware of what they're downloading. And the easiest way to do that is, at least with Apple products, is setting up family sharing. Okay, I don't work for Apple, I'm not advertising this, but it's actually a pretty good tool that they're developing still, it's not perfect, where when the child goes onto the App Store on their phone, instead of just finding that app that they heard about on the bus, in the back of the bus, let's say, that they want to get and hitting get, they could do all that, they could find it, they click get, but then it goes to your phone saying, your child Johnny wants to download Snapchat. And hopefully Johnny is old enough and he already talked to you about it, and you just click approve. If you've never heard of it, and then it goes to his phone and everything's fine. You at least know Snapchat or Kik or any of these other messaging apps that you've heard of or haven't, that you know it's there. There's photo vaults, there's some crazy stuff out there. So you know what's going on your child's phone, okay? Just in a couple of clicks. If Johnny didn't come to talk to you, and you get this alert pop up and says he wants to download, I don't know, Kik Messenger, which is an anonymous texting app, and you don't really know what that is, instead of just hitting approve, you might click on it and it'll take you to the App Store, and then you could read some reviews. What is it? Okay, that's what it is. If you want more information, you can go to commonsensemedia.org, commonsensemedia.org, and read some reviews there. Take 2 minutes, and then either hit approve, because that's okay, or you might go talk to Johnny. You know, what do you know about this app? What do you know? Have that dialogue. Teach them to be savvy users, and either say approve, or it says, I think it says no or disapprove, but I would say in your mind it's really about not yet. It's not yet, because they're going to get it eventually if they want it. When they're older, when they can demonstrate more appropriate behavior, when they're out of the house, eventually they're going to get it. So it's really about not yet. But either way, I would have that family sharing set up with the ask to buy checked off. Not about controlling them, it's about having that dialogue. Games, all of that is included. I would set up the restrictions and turning off in-app purchases so you don't get that crazy bill at the end of the month where it's only $5, but several times a month that adds up. And again, when you have weak impulse control, you know, it's, oh, my friend just downloaded Clash of Clans, and to get this treasure chest, I need to, it's only $5, and it's clicking down. I only have 5 hours left to get it, Dad. I really need it. All my friends have it. You know, instead of them just clicking get, they have to come talk to you about it. And then, okay, where's your allowance money? Or, okay, here's, you know, one time only because it's a free game. All right, $5, who cares? It's, all right, I didn't pay for the game, so fine, it's $5. Or no, or whatever, you could have that dialogue. That's what I'm promoting, the parental decision and the dialogue. Yes, one, you got it. There you go. And then number 5, when they act older, they'll be treated older, without a doubt. Okay? As they demonstrate more appropriate behavior, you're going to treat them older. That's just the way our world is set up. Getting a driver's license, I could think of endless examples. Walking across the street, when they're really little, you might carry them, then you might hold their hand, then you might just watch them cross the street, and you'll watch them from the window, then they're at their friend's house across the street, you don't even know where they are, but they're old enough and it's fine. It's a process. Same with the digital world, okay? Date it, the contract, review and revise as they get older. The rules are gonna change, their wants and needs are gonna change, so go with that. Incentives to comply, as they act older, they're gonna get more of what they want. Reinforcement cycles, again, respectful behavior, and I have to say on and offline. Throw that in for you all. On and offline earns more privileges. Okay? In my program, the end of my program, I call them DABs, digital access boxes, which are my recommendations for each age group of what you could be offering your children with the parental controls set up, so you actually could set those limits, again, over time. So just very briefly, this is just a sample. A couple of years ago, there was a viral contract that went around. This was sort of loosely based on that, but I've modified it some. Again, on my online course, I do have a customizable version of this where you could add in your own things and change all the wording. I would encourage you to take a look at that. So you could look through this. Again, the idea is not to stop them. The idea is to teach them so they are the savvy users over time. I know I'm going through this quickly. And then, of course, date it. If you want help with setting up these contracts, the person that that viral one that went around is that irules.co. My website is iparent101.com, and then there's another one, the smarttalk.org has another version where they set up contracts. Okay. Thank you very much. I ran through that. I'll hand this over. How's this thing work? Okay, cool.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm the last leg here. And I think we're gonna have like a question and answer thing, right? So I'll try to go quickly so we can get to that. Okay, let's see. Should I point this? Very good. All right. So I've been tasked, I think, with the job of answering this question tonight in like 15 minutes. How do we help kids whose use of the internet, social media, or video games is harming their development? So I think like any good psychologist, I'll try to answer this question with another question. What are the underlying reasons for using this technology? So I think that in order to be able to help the kids with the technology, we need to understand why they're using it, what are their needs, and what's going on. So I'm going to talk about it from two perspectives. One is the needs perspective, so what are they getting from it? And the other one is going to be a more clinical perspective. So what are some of the issues that go along with it? Okay, so technology meets our basic psychological needs. That's what I'm going to say. It's no longer like Maslow's hierarchy. It actually turns out that there are other things besides just like food and water. You can see what people are selecting here. I'm curious, let me think. Raise your hand if your kid has missed a meal or not showered because they were on the computer, on their iPhone, or they're doing something technologically related. Okay. For good measure, how many of you have missed a meal or missed a shower when asked which because you've been on some kind of form of technology? It's okay. All right. There we go. Right. My guess is that the reason that was happening is because one of their 3 primary needs were being met. And these are what they are. They're 3 basic psychological needs. The first one is autonomy, and that's being in control of your own decisions. And the way and there's a lot of research behind this, but the way I think about it is there are 2 ways in which you could be very autonomous in technology. One is you could choose what you're using. You could choose what video game you play. You could choose what social media app you use, right? But within the apps itself, within the games themselves, there's a lot of autonomy. And the more autonomy anyone experiences in any given situation, the more they're going to be rewarded, and the more they're going to feel reward and motivated to engage in that and participate in it more. So that's just what we know about life. So if I love playing basketball, right, and that's a choice of mine, I'm intrinsically motivated to do it, and no one else is telling me to do that, and I'm autonomous in that choice, I'm going to feel a lot of reward from that. The second one is competence. Second basic psychological need is competence. Mastering your environment and outcome. It's being good at something and feeling like you're good and getting positive feedback that you're good at it. And when we get that, we're more motivated to do something. And the last one's relatedness, feeling connected to others. So I think you could quickly see how this could apply to technology, right? These are the 3 basic needs, and they apply across our lives in all kinds of domains and realms. And technology really can meet these. Okay. So what? So people ask me all the time, I'm a psychologist, I see kids and adolescents, adults, and parents ask me like, well, you know, he's playing this much on his computer and they're doing this much on the phone, I'm not sure what we should do, maybe we should just take it all away and see how that works. So, okay, we can explore that. But then the question I have is, what are the needs that are being met by this, right? What are the basic needs? Because let's say you have a kid who's playing Minecraft, right, with their friends on a server, or Counter-Strike with their buddies, or World of Warcraft, or maybe they're on social media, right, talking to their friends all night, right? And you take that away from them, right? What are you removing? What need is not being met anymore? So the risk of setting limits sometimes, and the thing that we need to be thoughtful and considerate about is when we set limits and how we approach and think through the decisions we make about the rules and what we do is, are we going to undermine any needs, right? Which can have a negative psychological impact, right? Think about if you take someone's phone away and they're spending all this time talking to their friends, right? We're running the risk now that maybe they're going to feel isolated and lonely. They're going to feel left out, right? And maybe that's like something, you know, in some measure that might be helpful at that moment, but long term, right? What would that look like? So I think I like to think when we're talking about helping kids and how we can help them with technology and how we can help them in this area, we want to know what's going on underlying it, right? So if they're connecting a lot, and that's how they're getting that need for relatedness met through video games or Instagram or whatever it is there a way to replace that need for relatedness with something else, right? Or similarly, let's say like they're spending so much time in grossness. Now I'm talking in general about like kids who are spending a lot of time on this stuff too right now. But let's say they're spending a lot of time on, you know, social media. But then we also notice that they don't really feel like they're good at anything else, right? There's not a lot that they're good at or competent at, right? So one of the other basic needs isn't really being met. So maybe what you'd want to do as an approach to help that child or whoever it is focus less on what seems to be the problem and help find something to bolster these other needs, right? So maybe they need to feel like they're good at something else because all they are doing is feeling connected to others at that time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And like I think this is interesting with autonomy because kids have like no autonomy, right? Like they wake up, they go to school, and then they come home, they do whatever they have to do, and they go to sleep. And in that time frame, they're just told what to do, right? How much choice do they have, right? They have very little choice in their lives. So one of the places they could choose is through technology. So if that's what's happening, imagine if we were able to find ways to foster and increase their sense of autonomy in other ways of life. Would that help balance out in an indirect way some of these other things that we're concerned about? So from a needs perspective, I think it's important to really try to think through, and specifically these three, autonomy, competence, and relatedness, how they're being met through technology, through other areas, and sort of use that as a guide to think through decisions that we make. And it could be a tool itself. As you could tell, or as you could see, there are clear clinical considerations, right? So the kid who might have their technology removed from them might start to feel isolated and depressed, right? But how does it work? So is depression like soothed by technology, where you're feeling depressed, so you go online to sort of connect with others, or to play a game because you're good at it and you get the benefit from winning? Or does the technology cause depression? You're going on and you're seeing what your friends are doing and you're not invited, right? Or you're spending so much time on the computer that you aren't socializing with others, and now you're isolated and you just feel down because you feel like you're not connected, right? Does technology foster social anxiety? Where like you spend so much time on the computer that you forget how to talk to people in person, and when you go out you're nervous about it and you don't know what to say? Or does my chicken and eggs are off? Or does social anxiety cause technodge, as it says? Does social anxiety cause greater need for technology, right? So the kid who's like anxious socially might feel too nervous to go to a party or go to some activity, and it just feels safer to communicate, through Snapchat or Minecraft or meet people online, right? So which way does it go? Does and Bill could speak to this one, does ADHD worsen technology use such that you just get so stuck on the video games your prefrontal cortex can't pull you away from it? Or does the technology use do something funky to your brain, where like now your executive functioning is all out of whack and you can't do anything, right? So when I think about how do we help our kids with technology, I'm always trying to think about like, well, what's going on? Because if the target's just the technology piece of it, we might be missing the target. So like a kid who has social anxiety, anxiety's nature is to have anxious thoughts, right? So that would be like worries about communicating or interacting with others. And our inclination is to avoid when we're anxious. It's fight or flight. So a kid who has social anxiety, if they're using a lot of technology because they're too fearful to be around others, if you just set limits and take that away, you're not going to help the anxiety at all. Or you might even just make things worse, because now you're more isolated. Now you got a depressed kid with social anxiety. So I think it's really important to understand what's going on and to treat those underlying issues or address them, as well as like what are the needs that are being met with these things. So when is wired being a problem? He says, it's internet addiction, doctor. We have him hooked up to a USB. So I get this question a lot. I'm sure you guys get this question a lot. When is it a problem? How do we know it's a problem? The truth is it's a hard question for me to answer. I have to ask a lot of questions to find out what's going on about this and about that. But there's this new diagnosis that's under what's called further consideration. So it's not a real diagnosis. They're thinking about it. They're not sure. They're doing research in the DSM. It might be in the next edition. We don't know. But I think it gives a good idea, a good sense of how clinically we might think, is there a problem going on here? Okay? And this is for, I'll read them through, you don't have to worry about reading. It's for further study. This is for internet gaming disorder. So I'm thinking about these criteria for just any kind of technology use. So let's just see, you know, what might be a problem. And now for this disorder, it doesn't exist, by the way. You would need like 5 or more potentially to check off the boxes. So when would there be a problem? When the preoccupation becomes the dominant activity in life with the activity. When removed, there's anxiety, irritability, and sadness. There's a need to spend increasing amount of time on it. We're unable to self-regulate and control participation. There's a loss of interest in previous hobbies. We're using it despite the awareness of like some psychosocial problems. We're having like problems socially, right? We're deceiving family, therapists, and others about the usage. We're not being honest about it, we're hiding it. This gets to, we're using it to escape or relieve negative feelings, and it jeopardizes or gets in the way of like educational, school, or vocational activities. So if you just check one of these boxes, it's not necessarily a problem. But if you can check more than half of these, let's say, you're really looking at something. And then I would say let's go back and look at what the needs are being met and what are some underlying clinical issues that might be contributing to this. And what's the chicken and what's the egg? So you have to do some exploring here. And that's it.
So, happy to take your questions, all three of us. And also, there's Zach Gordon. And tell me your name again. Molly's here from McLean. It's just kind of a school perspective, too. Feel free to chime in. So, thoughts, questions?
In your beginning of your talk, you talked about the difference between the 1930s and today.
Yeah.
And how much of it, though, is also that we know more now about depression? And, I mean, how do you also factor all this in where, you know, we have the issue with the technology and it's those chicken and egg things, but, you know, we also have family history and genetics and brain chemistry and other, you know, stresses on family life. So how does that all sort of play together?
So the interesting thing is what this Jean Twenge did was she didn't look who's been diagnosed, she just simply who's reporting the symptoms. And so that many more people, and so certainly we're more aware of these, we may be more aware of the symptoms. But young people report dramatically more symptoms than they did. And it looks like the pace at which certainly many people think that self-injury is kind of the marker, the new psychopathology of this internet age. And there's dramatic increases in self-injury. People are trying to just keep up with the depression. I talked to somebody who was at AU who said that I think at the 2015-2016 school year, they had a 44% increase in number of referrals to the student mental health service. So I think it's pretty generally agreement that there's more, that we're living in a very, young people are living in a very tough time. There's just an article in Time magazine called the kids are not all right. And basically, what are I mean, every time you read about these suicides, it's all comes down to my experience. It comes down to the sense of control. What a gal said in the Time magazine article, it's just that these kids feel now that these young people, particularly teenagers, they feel like there's no escape from their life, and that they can't get out of it. I mean, several years ago, there's a study of social media. Actually, MTV did a study. And the people between 13 and 30 said, I feel enslaved by my online persona, but I can't look away. I can't walk away from it. So, excellent question. The back. Then you're next. Yeah,
So
go.
just the super practical question that I'm sure you get a lot. I mean, we do always hear, and I think we failed most of the tests, but we passed a few. But one of the ones that we always hear is, I need the computer for my homework. And, you know, it's 7, 8 o'clock at night. We have 3 other kids. We can't constantly stand there and monitor. Is it really homework or is it a YouTube video? Like, it's just practically, and it's like just any thoughts on that homework argument?
Digital parenting is almost impossible. It's not impossible, but it's not. Your children are not lying to you. My daughter's in 7th grade, and I think 99.9% of her homework is in Google Docs, which includes YouTube. So even when I attempt to, set certain limits and okay, the phone's out, whatever, she has to be on YouTube to do her science homework. And so it's really, it's like whack-a-mole. You could, we're gonna set this limit, then we're gonna say, it's almost impossible, which is where the dialogue with them comes in, and are they getting their work done? Because as Bill said earlier, this misnomer of multitasking is very real, that the kids think when they're listening to music and they're Snapchatting and doing 8 other things, it doesn't really affect their work. Common Sense Media that I mentioned earlier did a big study that was on CNN in, last year, 2015, where I think they said like 2/3 of teens don't think multitasking impacts their homework. It doesn't slow them down, and it does. It's just not true. But again, they're kids, and the psychological needs trump it. So, sorry to use the word Trump, but it's more important, right? It's to feel connected is more important in that moment, and so they are doing their homework on Google, but they're also finding a way to do other things at the same time, and there's an impact. So what to do about that is to try to keep that dialogue going, check in on them, set time limits, teach them to set time limits, where they're getting their work done, work then play, where you might build in some time where when you get your homework done, and depending on the kid's age, you might check it really quick just to make sure you eyeball, okay, their homework is done, and they're not, go on Edline or whatever McLean's version is, and are they keeping up in their class? Are there a bunch of incompletes or whatever? And then build in some time, if possible, some nights where they can be on some social media or whatever. Not right before bed, hopefully, not in bed, but where you work, then you play. But sometimes when the kids get home at 8:30 from whatever practice, the play, the basketball team, and they still have to do their homework, it's really hard to build that in. And this gets to, this is a very difficult time. But that would be my take. Keep the dialogue going. Teach them to regulate.
Can I just add that I agree, and I think that also that as I learn more, as this research comes out about screen time and what it's connected with, we really ought to be pushing back schools that require kids to do most of the work in front of online. Again, there's no evidence at all that the kids learn more, they do better. In part because all these studies where they put laptops in every classroom, kids they get on the internet. They do all the distractions. They spend 15 minutes working on their fonts. That nobody can demonstrate that they actually focus more. They actually get more done. And I think that I'm a million years old, but it just seems to me that if we want kids to be healthy, we want their brains to work well, they can't be spending a lot of their day in school, online, coming home and being online to get their work done, and then doing social media. We have to push back. From my point of view, there's just an article came out titled the $6 billion, the greatest $6 billion hoax in educational history, with the $6 billion making schools as high tech as possible. So I have a question for you too, but other thoughts, questions? Actually, you, yeah.
Let's say question first to Michael, but for everyone else too. Well, this internet gaming disorder items. Let's say I figured all of these items are true for my daughter, and maybe true for my daughter, and she's a senior. She's going in 3 months to college. So, what would you advise me at this moment? I have 3 months ahead of me. What to start with?
That's a good question, a tough question to answer. Well, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but I think that what Adam's saying about the discussion piece, as much I don't know how open she is to discussing this with you, I don't know how much of a power struggle it's become or not at all. But I would suggest trying to talk to her more about learn more about what she's using, what she's playing, why she's playing it, if she's playing games. Play the game with her if you haven't played the games with her. Learn as much as you can about the games. I think that you can get a lot of collateral with kids around games if you know a lot about it, because you could really understand why they're playing them in certain ways. I'm not a gamer myself, but I'll talk to high schoolers about their gaming. Like, I know that in League of Legends, it's a 45-minute match. So when the kid comes home, mom can't expect him to be on there for 15 minutes. And if he starts another one, I know he's hooked in for another 45 minutes. So understanding the nuances of how the games work, and also who they're playing with. Is it because their friends are in California that they're playing with and they hook on at after they get off work or school, and it's 3 hours later there? So I think there's a lot of exploring that can be done to learn about what's going on, what the game's like for you to play. And then if we're more connected, it becomes more of a dialogue, and I think that can help you understand what needs are being met. If there are any underlying issues that are going on, maybe these are the only people for someone that they're talking to, and it really matters. Does that make sense? And I think just there's a lot of exploring. I'm just thinking that I'd like to do, would want to know about, to think through why that's happening, and then to extrapolate okay, well, how can you manage in college? What's going to happen in college? How are you going to be able to do that and this? I don't know if that helps, or.
I would add on, I'm trying to find it on your list here, I would focus on the level of interference it is causing for her, and can she identify, and can you get her to either agree, or does she see any difficulty in her approach and this level of gaming that she's choosing to do? And she has choices, and I would poke at the autonomy that she is exercising and trying to help her see, without shoving it down her throat, because then it'll just be a battle, but help her see that it is getting in her way, and as she's leaving for college, you're not going to be able to stop it. In fact, it will get worse, but chances are things are not going to turn out. She's not going to be able to do the things she wants to do and be as successful as she likely is intending to be. And I would kind of focus on her. Can she identify that?
I'll also mention, one of the things I'd love to have a little discussion about is that I've advised parents for years to tell your kid, I can't send you to college if I'm still regulating your technology use. I can't send you to college. I'm not going to spend $50,000 to $60,000 sending you to college if I'm worried that you can't regulate your technology. So I want to be able to see before I send you out to college that you can regulate it. And if she says it doesn't think it's a problem and you do, let's talk to somebody and get an impartial opinion about whether this is problematic or not. Because I think in this area we tend to think about college as an entitlement. I've seen kids who barely get through high school, and they expect their parents to send them to a $60,000 program. And from my point of view, it's such an enormous investment in a kid's future that it seems to me that if we said to a kid, I'm going to take $50,000 and throw it in the toilet, I mean, I think that's crazy. But for so many kids who they can't regulate their sleep, they can't regulate their use of technology, the likelihood that they're going to have trouble in college is pretty high. And I just think that I think about where do we have leverage? And for some kids, they want to drive. It's getting increasingly less now that kids use Uber, but if kids want to drive, we had some leverage over whether they drive. And I recommend, for example, that you keep that the kids keep a sleep log. I was actually seeing whether Fitbits could actually help parents monitor how much sleep again, but they're wildly inaccurate. Fitbits create all kinds of addictions in themselves. But I was talking to a behavioral sleep specialist at Children's Hospital who says that the best thing to do is to have kids keep a sleep log. You say, I trust you, but if your log tells me you're getting at least 8 hours of sleep, you can drive. Otherwise, you can't. But I think with this, you got to keep going to college. There's no you aren't required to send her to spend an enormous amount of money if you think it's a bad investment. And again, it's just a matter of not yet. It's a matter of not a matter of whether. It's a matter of when. From my point of view. So,
I have a question. In your experiences, is there anything unique or specific that you all have found is helpful for families that are fighting to not conform to what other families have set as a standard? families to set their own rules?
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah.
Would be my response. This community, the fact that this library is pretty much full, is before there were no empty chairs practically, and getting that dialogue among the parents going. Ironically, either online or listservs. This is what my son is saying. How many other parents in this grade are downloading this app? What do you guys know about this? This is what I read on Common Sense Media. Having this dialogue, so as a community you can join together and unite and have a unified
It's helpful.
front.
It's helpful for me to hear you, just because I think that there's so much strength in numbers. I think the parents know that other parents are holding for a role. It just gives you power.
Because we have to fight back. We are digital immigrants, all of us in this room. We were not born in the digital world. I don't know if you've heard that term. They are children, very clearly, are digital natives. They know no different. Some of what I'm saying right now would sound bizarre to them because this is everything they know. By the time they're, I've seen kids 1 year old and younger knowing how to flip through on the iPhone. They just, somehow it's intuitive. And it's not for me. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out these things. I set up my son's Xbox, right? The new Xbox. For his birthday, I spent a lot of time on this stuff. I felt like I was 80 years old. It was so beyond me.
Just throw it in the trash.
That wasn't gonna work.
You have to YouTube it.
I almost did because I just couldn't get it. So again, that's the Xbox, and so I think there's a fear element that happens with us as digital immigrants, and we just want to avoid it and just hope back to the reactive mode. I hope everything's gonna be okay. Everyone else is doing it. Take a deep breath and we'll deal with it if something comes up. So it's this dialogue also and joining in as digital parenting pioneers. We are pioneers. There's no other generation out there ever that are dealing with what we are dealing with as parents. So I'm glad you all are here.
The digital native, where I saw this cartoon years ago. These two boys are playing video games, and their mom says, "Why don't you play outside?" The kid said, "I don't think we have that game."
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure if this addresses that. It's probably in the realm of it, but I think just sort of as something I've noticed talking to families, especially when I first meet them and I talk to parents, are two things. One is that sometimes there's a reluctance and the fear of setting a limit. There's a reluctance and the fear of it, that there's gonna be some backlash, that they're gonna have a tantrum, right? And I mean, I'm a behaviorist, so I'm thinking, well, we have extinction, that's not gonna last forever, and obviously it's case by case. But I think that's a common thing. But I do notice that when parents do make a joint decision and are on the same page and set a limit, whatever it is, kids will adapt to it. They will adapt. And that is a reasonable fear, but I've noticed just over and over again that it seems to work out. And I think something else I've sort of seen across the board is times when I will meet with families, it's sort of early on, and I'll ask I have on my intake questionnaire how much game time and how is it a problem, and people circle yes or no, and I see no, and then not always, but often I'll find out well, we don't allow screens all week, right? So there's already been an established rule, and I ask the kids about it separately. I'm yeah, it seems like you can't be on the computer or play games during the week. And they're yeah, that's a rule. It's not even a big deal. It's just this is how life is. And I just sort of see that when parents feel comfortable setting those limits, even if it's during the week, and I just sort of see that a lot, kids adapt. And they're cool with it. They're yeah, this is just how it is. Even if Johnny gets the new device, yeah, I can't use that during the week.
Some days, but then other days they'll fight it.
Yeah.
Okay, because we have the established time frames every day, and some days go completely smooth. Everybody understands the rules, and then there's that day when they're in the middle of NBA 2K playing a game with a guy online, and they don't want to stop right now. I can't stop. I can't save the game, or whatever, and you can't get them off.
Make those a couple of gimmies a month.
Yeah.
Give them a couple. They're going to fight. If it's a problem twice a month, it's just not a big deal. That kind of thing. And I think too that I've seen so many families where the parents fight with the kid about getting to bed on time, and the parents have trouble themselves getting better. And I just think that being honest with the kids about what a huge challenge for all of us. That you see that as you were saying, the more you do this stuff, the greater self-discipline it takes. And I think just being honest with kids, the modeling part. One of the first psychologists I ever brought into my group, after a couple of years, moved to Florida, and she sent me a postcard that said, "I want to give you some advice that my mother gave me, because I sure as hell won't be using it." You know, and I think that the way we live, and just acknowledging this is a challenge for all of us, I think it makes kids more likely to go along with it. And one thing I wanted to ask you, Adam, is that, you know, my sense is that I personally, you know, you may convince me differently, but I personally don't want parents being heavy into regulating kid technology use when they're junior in high school, say. I want them to, I want it to be their problem. I want, and in the same, and I say that in the same way that if we work harder to help kids solve their problem than they work, that they externalize, becomes, we're the asshole. That they don't work, they don't have to wrestle with this problem. So help me understand from the I-parenting point of view, what in terms of if kids we want kids to wrestle with this, so that by the time they're ready to leave home, they've figured out ways to solve their own problem.
Right. So in any type of evolution or adaptation, I was going to say this earlier anyway, struggle is part of learning. So, you know, the gimmies a couple of times a month or whatever is part of the process. So I would predict that. I would help your children predict that, and I would predict that for yourselves, that we know this isn't going to be smooth sailing. As they get older, part of that struggle is alive and well, and I'm not going to convince you otherwise, except, you know, when you're a junior, you do have to wrestle, you know, at age 16, 17 with this, so you could then leave the house at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, depending on the family, right? And it is going to be up to them to sink or swim. My caveat to that, with at least many families that I work with, is that by junior, even senior, if you really let, you know, if you give them the full keys to the kingdom of the adult digital world, the intensity and the extent to which they might go to that far end is too far, to the point where it's beyond just struggling and wrestling with it. It's disastrous to the point where they're not going to progress past. And so it's beyond just a healthy level of struggling to learn. It becomes more of a clinical issue, where then I'm referring them to Dr. Reiter. So it's really about threshold at that age, and as you know, the iParent program, the DABs that I was talking about earlier, the digital access boxes, when we get the 5th box, which is sort of 15 plus, you know, it's almost, I say this in my workshop, it's almost hypothetical at that point. I don't know how realistic it is, but I want to have it in there because this is what you're eventually teaching your 16-year-old, 17-year-old to be able to do on their own. And if it's not there and you don't have that box that they can get into, and that they're, okay, I have pretty much full access, parents still know my password, but I pretty much have full access, it's very hard to then pull them back to box 4 when they're acting inappropriate beyond whatever that line is that you have in your head as parent. It really becomes down to parenting. And so, you know, just like if they were driving a car, you want them at age 18, let's say, to be able to drive safely. They have a license, they might be under your insurance still, but they are driving. It's on them. You know, if God forbid there's an accident, there's an accident. It's on them. But if you know your child, you know, already got 4 speeding tickets and likes to, I've worked with guys where when in particular you like to hit the curb to do a wheelie in their car, and usually the tires did not pop, but once in a while, there was one particular incident where the axle broke. That was a major problem. And if, you know, so again, I would say, just as an extreme example, that, you know, is beyond what I would say is healthy struggle. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but that's where I would go.
Just one quick follow-up in terms of those limits, and I brought my teenager with me to try and make sure he heard this.
Poor kid. This man is the head of a wonderful middle school.
That's why my teenager's here. On the plus side, he doesn't do the social media, so we're just talking video games. And he gets his homework done, and he does his chores with no more than 6 reminders. And so he's getting better about that. But still, what my worry is our time on the weekends, you know, we have the limits. And then if I'm not careful, and you know, he's got his stuff done, we're pushing 3, we're pushing 4, we're pushing 5 hours on a weekend. a school night. We've got all his homework done. He's got all his stuff done, and he'll go downstairs, and we've got other kids, and we're busy, and all of a sudden that 1 hour limit has become 2, has become 3. And on the one hand, I see there's nothing in his life that's failing at the moment. Like his schoolwork is good, his behavior is good, his attitude's good, but I just have a word that just, for me, it's crazy to spend that much time doing anything. So like, I'm hoping you'll tell me no more than an hour during the weekdays, and I know you can't, but is there research that gives just limits beyond which it's just not healthy to sit? And he runs every day, so he's going out and he's getting exercise. So, the things I'm asking him to do, he's checking those boxes. Then he's going right back and sitting on that couch. And so, is there just a certain amount of time beyond which it's just not good for you, even if you're checking all the other boxes? I need answers. We roll for an hour and a half.
It's coming to me. It's 67 minutes. No, really, there's a linear correlation between how much time you spend in front of a screen and how and physical health problems, mental health problems. I mean, that's just the fact. And so, I think we ought to be teaching kids. We ought to teach it. My assumption is that kids have a brain in their head and they want their life to work. I mean, that's one of the major assumptions that I have. And that I mean, how many of us eat more than we should, or stay up too late, or that I want kids to be wrestling with it, to say that your son, that there's all this evidence that you actually function much better and you feel much better if you spend less time online. And exploring, what else can you do? I mean, how else, in terms of the basic needs that you're talking about, I mean, that need for affiliation, that need for relatedness, and a sense of competence, and a sense of autonomy. If you're getting it, where else can you get it? But my sense, I mean, this stuff is really very powerful, obviously. But most kids, that if you talk with them in a respectful way, and you assume that they want their life to work, and you kind of you negotiate a little bit, it's not going to be perfect, but it moves in the right direction. And I've seen so many kids, many kids, who come to their parents and say, "Will you help me set limits on this? I make myself sick."
So I'm hearing no more than an hour at night during the week. That's what I'm hearing.
What games do you play at night when you're done with homework?
It depends. School nights I'll go for something like Uncharted where I could pause and save kind of at will. On the weekends when I have a little more time, I'll play Overwatch, which is online multiplayer.
Are you playing with your friends?
No, because my friends all have Xbox and I'm on PlayStation, but...
Are you playing with other people?
I'm playing with other people, yes.
Same people each time?
No, not ever actually.
It's interesting that for years, just my impression, that when I'd see a kid who's really using technology excessively, for a boy, they were always playing World of Warcraft. And just you think about the sense of, and in fact, I saw a player maybe 15 years ago. I gave a lecture 15 years ago on sleep deprivation. And a parent said that their kid, their high school kid said, "God, I'm just so tired in the morning, I have trouble falling asleep." And they took him to Hopkins for a sleep evaluation. And they diagnosed him with a feigned sleep disorder, because they told him that I get up, that I play World of Warcraft, and the people I play with are in different time zones. I get up at 2 in the morning and play, and I can't get out of bed. And I think that thinking about that many kids, their strong sense of relatedness, that great sense of autonomy and competence that comes getting better and better. The games are so brilliantly designed.
Oh yeah, they hire psychologists to design.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my knowledge is from USA Today or newspapers. But I thought I read an article recently that suggested that technology has a positive impact on your psychological feelings for a certain amount of time, and it starts up to I don't know what they said, say a couple hours, and then after that it starts to have a depressive effect on you psychologically, and the longer you stay on, the more depressive it gets. So we try to limit it just with that thought in mind, is that okay, there's some benefit psychologically for a while, but we don't want to get to the point where it's tailoring down. But I don't know my source on that, unfortunately. I thought you guys might have heard
It's all
about
about balance.
Yeah.
It's really no one answer, but that's what I would push for.
And helping kids remember that we're part of nature. Just looking at a nature just look at a poster of nature. It lowers your stress level. And just we have to have. Well, one of the wisest things that people suggested to me was have as you're saying, a family plan. You say, here's in my week, I want to be spending this much time working, this much time working out, this much time meditating, this time sleeping, and I'll fit in technology after I make sure the stuff that I really need to take care of myself is in. And I think that having this kind of dialogue with kids really makes sense.
Where do you fit television in with all of this? We used to sort of lump it in as just all screens, and then we found that at least with television, that was something we could all do together. And my husband and I are trying to introduce the kids to some movies we love, and they like watching. I mean, for the most part, some of the stuff was against them, but they're watching things like the Food Network or The Voice, or there's something, at least it's not my particular interest, but it's something we can talk about and sort of share. But we also know, and of course there's like sports on. I'm sure they're all watching at home right now. But that's something my husband shares with the kids is watching his team. So where does that kind of fit into all of this?
Again, I'll jump in with this, what I just said, balance. Whatever the size of the screen, whatever the content coming out of it, if you're sitting and staring, relatively immobile for multiple hours on end, it's going to have an impact for anything in nature. And so, certain content is better than others. Not all screen time is created equal, but someone came up with this term of digital diet, where you want to have a good balance of this type of technology, and then some of this, and then there's some junk food in there too, and just trying to have that balance, like a balanced diet, right? And so that would be my thought. Dan Siegel out in California has done some amazing research, both on sleep deprivation, and he has, I don't remember, he has this digital platter, I think he calls it, or life platter, and he has these 7 areas of life. And he basically says all 7 are significantly impacted when you stare at a screen for that many hours. So I would say balance.
I think, so kids I got a new phone. They'll come to my office and they're always nicer than my phone. I'm just like, that's pretty nice. My phone's all cracked and old. And I'm like, that's not really a phone, that's a computer and a TV that you have there. And then I'll show them sometimes when we're done, when we walk out to the front, there's a desk there with a real phone that you push buttons on, and it does this speakerphone thing. And I'm just like, that's a phone, and that's not a phone. That's a computer, it's a TV, it's a video game device, it's everything in one. So when I think about that, I think if we want to watch TV together, sometimes we have to get down there on the field and play the game that they're playing in a way, right? We have to sort of meet them where they are. So if you're watching movies that you want to watch it on the phone with them. See what I'm saying? Try to meet them where they are. Maybe it's on the computer because they're just so used to not sitting in front of a television that
they're okay sitting in front.
they might be, but some kids aren't. Some kids just are it's on their phone or the computer because they got multiple things going on. So thinking about it more broadly, what are the activities that they're doing and how are they engaging it, and let's do it their way so we can have that time in a different way.
The point you made earlier too, Michael, about one of the things that many people say about video games is that it's a lot easier to guide your kids if you play with them. I struck with if your kid's really into baseball or ballet, you tend to learn quite a lot about it. But many of us digital immigrants know nothing about it. And that's so your program's so important. We just don't know about what they're doing.
Right.
And I think that when adults play games, they understand it. As you're saying, some games, the voice said. I used to say, limit technology to an hour a day. And kids would say, well, in my game it takes an hour and a half to get to the next level, and it's constantly frustrating. So let's negotiate. Let's say an hour and a half every other day, that kind of thing. But showing interest in what they're doing, trying to understand it from their perspective is really helpful. So a couple more questions.
A lot of high schoolers have crossed that threshold. Diagnosed depression, social anxiety, self-injury. Where are we going from here? Their needs are being met socially, online. You take it away, then there's another reaction. Where do we go from there? It's like a double-edged sword. It's, the threshold is already crossed.
Well, you know, I think that there's always corrective. I mean, nature corrects. You know, and you think about how popular mindfulness is. The McLean, you know, is school-wide a mindfulness program. And you think about the opposite of multitasking. It's really being the present moment. And you think about meditation is becoming wildly popular as we work into school programs. And I personally think that meditation is going to be one of the tools that allow people to get some distance from technology and experience in their own mind a level of peace and quietness and happiness that they're really estranged from the more technology they use. I think there's going to be corrective things that is, it's unsustainable. I mean, the direction we're going is not, kids are getting tighter and tighter, more stressed, more anxious, more depressed, and it's not sustainable. I think that they'll be corrected. I mean, a lot of kids are asking now for relief from this stuff. So,
and if I may say, that's modeling in my experience hearing from kids. I'll hear sort of every side of it, whether parents are sort of using technology all the time and it's making it, it's sending a mixed message, and if there's sort of a real tone set that technology is not there. I think it's very empowering for kids to see that their parents can do something, that there's a standard, and that their parents really don't question it, and or if it's a real struggle, owning that struggle and being like, look how hard this is for me, but I'm doing it and I can do it. I think that is when sort of everything else is, when you're sort of really desperate for something to work. I think unfortunately, as hard as that can be, that to me makes the most sense.
that's a great point. There's a study in England recently where 60% of parents thought their kids used technology excessively. 70% of the kids thought their parents used technology excessively. Well, thank you so much for coming, folks.
Thank you. Thank all three of you.